can you give us an overview of the history of Austrian wine and the sort of production that the country had for many centuries?
Well, looking to the history of Austrian wine, we can go even back to Celtic times in Austria. So within Europe, Austria has one of the oldest wine histories, and we have findings in the eastern part of Austria where we have proved that already the population around 1000 before Christ has been into winemaking, wine production, and whatever in these days wine was called. But basically you can count on two major developments in the history of Austrian wine. First of all, you have the time of the Roman Empire, and you know that the Danube used to be the northern border for the Roman Empire, and due to all the Roman developments in Europe, the Roman time had a big impact in the developing of Austrian vineyards. The second most important period in the development of Austrian wine areas and vineyards was the time between the Middle Ages and the time of the secularization, so the early 19th century. And in these days, monastic estates were kind of leading in the development of the vineyards in Austria, due to a very simple reason. Because in these days, monks were the only ones who could read and write. Therefore, they were the carriers of scientific research. And so basically monks were the ones who were trying to find out where are the best places to grow wine, how can we improve the quality of winemaking, what are the best grapes to grow wine in these surroundings and in these climatical situations. And so monasteries were the ones who had a really strong impact in the development of Austrian vineyards. In the 14th century, Austrian vineyards were about 4 times the size of what it is today, and but due to certain developments, for example, beer brewing was one of the reasons that winemaking declined. But there was also the reason that there was a little ice age actually in the late 17th century, who made a big break actually in the growing areas of Austria. However, I think that we could say that Austria has a really rich history in winemaking in Central Europe on one side. However, today we also have a kind of a modern approach actually in winemaking. You find today a lot of family businesses in Austria who on one side carrying the traditions, on the other side who also motivated, to try out new things, to go different ways. It's sometimes I have even the impression, it's a kind of a new world within the old world, So this is we I think we're combining history, traditions, but also with a new and modern, fresh way.
Excellent. And tell me a bit about the structure of the vineyards and the wineries here, because you have many producers in Austria and not too many hectares of vines.
Exactly. I mean, looking to the overall size of Austria, we are looking after about 50,000 hectares, which is about the size of today's Burgundy. And for this area, there are about 3,000 producers. So small family businesses from 5 hectares, to a few of them are a little bit bigger, to 50 to 100 hectares, which is in an international terms is quite small actually, in fact. Also, due to historical reasons, the vineyards here in Austria are quite fragmented. So that means every winemaker in Austria has a small parcel here and a small parcel there, and so with the result that we're working in 10 to 30 different single vineyards, and at the end of the day, you know, we have to fit things then together. And also, if you're looking to the structure of the vineyards in Austria, we have more than 5,400 vineyards in Austria, and even only here in the Danube area it's 2,500. So, you know, the overall structure is quite complicated. We're also looking to 18 different growing areas. However, it's on one side it's complicated, on the other side it's not so complicated. You know, I think the most important thing to know about Austria, to give it a picture, is that we have three main growing areas. You have the most southern parts of the growing areas, an area that is called Steiermark, or Styria in English. It's an area where producers are concentrating on Chardonnay and on Sauvignon Blanc. And then you have the most eastern parts of Austria, and everything that is south of the Danube. These are growing areas that are concentrating on red wine production and a little bit on sweet wine around the Lake of Neusiedl.
And then and the red varieties there?
The red varieties is mainly Blaufränkisch and Zweigelt. Zweigelt is the main red wine grape variety. However, it's an authentic Austrian grape variety that became modern in the past 30 years. And Blaufränkisch is a very old traditional red wine grape variety that exists already for quite some centuries. And then you have everything that is north of the Danube, where producers are concentrating on the grape varieties of Grüner Veltliner and Riesling. And as the part north of the Danube counts for about 2/3 of the overall production, this is basically the reason why Austria internationally is mainly known as a white wine producing country.
Great. And you're chairman of the association, which is beginning to kind of create Austria's appellations and crus. Can you explain how you're doing this and all about the Erste Lagen tasting that we've just had?
Yeah, it's you know, the situation after World War II was that Austria was in a transition mode from the field blend in the early days, or in the old days, into single varietal planting, with the result that for the past 50-60 years the marketing for selling wine was based mainly on grape varieties. And since the early 2000s we decided to go into an appellation system for several reasons. So since early 2000 we are, you know, trying to develop this appellation system for selling wine after its origin. And the result is that that origin is getting more and more into the spot of attention. Now, as I said before, as we have only here in the Danube area 2,500 vineyards, and as you can imagine, it's impossible for anyone to know all these vineyards. We need a guiding system, you know, and so we know from other areas of the world that a classification system of vineyards is something that can be very helpful to consumers, to have a certain guideline. And so this is the reason why we started already back in 1992 to form an association with the ambitious goal to establish a vineyard classification system in the Danube area. Now, as you can imagine, it's not very easy to establish a vineyard classification system. You know, this is not something that you can do from one day to another. You make click and then it's here. So it needs time, you know, even if you're looking to the history of the classification systems in France, then you will see it took quite a long time, you know, until they were really established, until all the producers, you know, could identify with the system and all that. So also we believe that, you know, we need a lot of time to establish a classification system. And so we take it very seriously. It's a generation project, and so we are about now halfway through. And so we are basically have been laying down the basement of the classification. We're working now on the classification of the Premier Crus, so of the Erste Lage vineyards. And in order to do that, every year we're doing a presentation for professionals, for experts, and in order actually to help us in the classification process, we want to have their opinion. And this is why we're here in Grafenegg, actually to taste all these wines from these vineyards that we have classified as Erste Lage or as Premier Crus.
Excellent. And what's the timeline? Because you say we're still defining it today. Where do you think, which generation do you think will be able to have your Grand, your Premier Cru clearly outlined?
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a generation project. I mean definitely, you know, the next generation will see, you know, the results. And well, by the way, I mean the next generation is already helping actually, you know, in the process. They are a very important part in the classification process, so basically we started with the classification process in 2009, and after close to 10 years I'm expecting that at least for the next 5 to 10 years we will continue actually to classify on the segment of the Premier Crus. When we're finished after that, so in like 5 to 10 years, then we will start with the classification process of the Grand Crus, so of the, you know, of the smallest segment, of the best 2 to 3% of the overall, and that will last for another 5 to 10 years, I believe. And then we will see how we will get the whole classification and into the legislation.
Great. And so far it's only Gruner, Veltliner and Riesling that are in this kind of appellation zone.
Well, from our regulations, we are not defining actually grape varieties, because the classification process is only dealing with the vineyards itself. However, the appellation, and this is the reason why only Gruner, Veltliner and Riesling is so far actually in connection with the classification, that the appellation laws allows only Gruner, Veltliner and Riesling for wines of origin.
Do you think in the pipeline at some point in the future, are there any plans for other appellations that focus on red varieties to do the same?
It's very likely. I mean, you know, other regions have implemented red wine in their appellation system. So in these areas, it's very likely if in case they start with the classification system, that also red wine will then, in that case, will be implemented, certainly.
Okay. My last question is a personal question. What is your favourite sites for Gruner and for Riesling? Do you have any preferred soils, any preferred regions within any microsites that you would recommend? What do you like to drink?
Well, it is, you see that my interest is in the different personalities actually of these vineyards, and maybe there's one aspect that we could look at, and what I think is especially important when we're talking about the Danube area, which is today certainly the sweet spot for Gruner, Veltliner and Riesling in Austria. I think that we can distinguish between two archetypes of vineyard sites in the Danube area. So on one side we are looking to vineyards that are based on terraces, along the Danube and the side rivers of the Danube. So these vineyards are very dry, have a high mineralization in the soil. So these vineyards, they are ideal for Riesling production. On the other side, we're looking to vineyards that are based on loess, on clay, on loamy soils. So vineyards that supply a good water supply to the wines. These are ideal for Grüner Veltliner. So basically, this is one of the reasons why we do have the two grape varieties in this area, because Grüner Veltliner and Riesling, they're complementary. What one likes, the other doesn't like, and the other way around. So we need the two grape varieties in order to cover the different vineyard sites and the different personalities of our vineyard sites. And I'm not sure if I can say, you know, I have a preference for this or for this, you know, personality of a vineyard. And probably it would not be fair, you know, to any of those, because I have a great appreciation, you know, to all of them. And I think the most important thing is, you know, that a producer is so honest to the vineyard and is honest and willing, you know, to work out the personality of these vineyards.
Excellent. So just keep tasting through all the different single sites.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a great opportunity to learn all of this.
Fabulous. Thank you very much.